Matthew Henry's Commentary on the Whole Bible. 2 Samuel 14. How Absalom threw himself out of his royal father's protection and favor we read in the foregoing chapter, which left him in exile, outlawed, and proscribed. In this chapter we have the arts that were used to bring him and his father together again, and how at last it was done, which is here recorded to show the folly of David in sparing him and indulging him in his wickedness, for which he was soon after severely corrected by his unnatural rebellion. 1. Joab, by bringing a feigned issue, as the lawyers speak, to be tried before him, in the case of a poor widow of Tekoa, gains from him a judgment in general, that the case might be so as that the putting of a murderer to death ought to be dispensed with, verses 1 to 20. 2. Upon the application of this, he gains from him an order to bring Absalom back to Jerusalem, while yet he was forbidden the court, verses 21 to 24. 3. After an account of Absalom, his person and family, we are told how at length he was introduced by Joab into the king's presence, and the king was thoroughly reconciled to him, verses 25 to 33. Joab's stratagem in Absalom's favor, the art of Joab, 1029 BC. 1. Now Joab the son of Zeruiah perceived that the king's heart was toward Absalom. 2. And Joab sent to Tekoa, and fetched thence a wise woman, and said unto her, I pray thee, feign thyself to be a mourner, and put on now mourning apparel, and anoint not thyself with oil, but be as a woman that had a long time mourned for the dead. 3. And come to the king, and speak on this manner unto him. So Joab put the words in her mouth. 4. And when the woman of Tekoa spake to the king, she fell on her face to the ground, and did obeisance, and said, Help, O king. 5. And the king said unto her, What aileth thee? And she answered, I am indeed a widow woman, and mine husband is dead. 6. And thy handmaid had 2 sons, and they 2 strove together in the field, and there was none to part them, but the one smote the other, and slew him. 7. And, behold, the whole family is risen against thine handmaid, and they said, Deliver him that smote his brother, that we may kill him, for the life of his brother whom he slew, and we will destroy the heir also, and so they shall quench my coal which is left, and shall not leave to my husband neither name nor remainder upon the earth. 8. And the king said unto the woman, Go to thine house, and I will give charge concerning thee. 9. And the woman of Tekoa said unto the king, My lord, O king, the iniquity be on me, and on my father's house, and the king and his throne be guiltless. 10. And the king said, Whosoever saith aught unto thee, bring him to me, and he shall not touch thee any more. 11. Then said she, I pray thee, let the king remember the Lord thy God, that thou wouldest not suffer the revengers of blood to destroy any more, lest they destroy my son. And he said, As the Lord liveth, there shall not one hair of thy son fall to the earth. 12. Then the woman said, Let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak one word unto my lord the king. And he said, Say on. 13. And the woman said, Wherefore then hast thou thought such a thing against the people of God? For the king doth speak this thing as one which is faulty, in that the king doth not fetch home again his banished. 14. For we must needs die, and are as water spilt on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again, neither doth God respect any person, yet doth he devise means, that his banished be not expelled from him. 15. Now therefore that I am come to speak of this thing unto my lord the king, it is because the people have made me afraid. And thy handmaid said, I will now speak unto the king, it may be that the king will perform the request of his handmaid. 16. For the king will hear, to deliver his handmaid out of the hand of the man that would destroy me and my son together out of the inheritance of God. 17. Then thine handmaid said, The word of my lord the king shall now be comfortable, for as an angel of God, so is my lord the king to discern good and bad, therefore the Lord thy God will be with thee. 18. Then the king answered and said unto the woman, Hide not from me, I pray thee, the thing that I shall ask thee. And the woman said, Let my lord the king now speak. 19. And the king said, Is not the hand of Joab with thee in all this? And the woman answered and said, As thy soul liveth, my lord the king, none can turn to the right hand or to the left from aught that my lord the king hath spoken. For thy servant Joab, he bade me, and he put all these words in the mouth of thine handmaid. 20. To fetch about this form of speech hath thy servant Joab done this thing, and my lord is wise, according to the wisdom of an angel of God, to know all things that are in the earth. Here is 1. Joab's design to get Absalom recalled out of banishment, his crime pardoned, and his attainder reversed. Verse 1. Joab made himself very busy in this affair. 1. As a courtier that was studious, by all ways possible, to ingratiate himself with his prince and improve his interest in his favor, he perceived that the king's heart was towards Absalom, and that, the heat of his displeasure being over, he still retained his old affection for him, and only wanted a friend to court him to be reconciled, and to contrive for him how he might do it without impeaching the honor of his justice. Joab, finding how David stood affected, undertook this good office. 2. As a friend to Absalom, for whom perhaps he had a particular kindness, whom at least he looked upon as the rising sun, to whom it was his interest to recommend himself. He plainly foresaw that his father would at length be reconciled to him, and therefore thought he should make both his friends if he were instrumental to bring it about. 3. As a statesman and one concerned for the public welfare. He knew how much Absalom was the darling of the people, and, if David should die while he was in banishment, it might occasion a civil war between those that were for him, and those that were against him, for it is probable that though all Israel loved his person, yet they were much divided upon his case. 4. As one who was himself a delinquent, by the murder of Abner. He was conscious to himself of the guilt of blood, and that he was himself obnoxious to public justice, and therefore whatever favor he could procure to be shown to Absalom would corroborate his reprieve. 2. His contrivance to do it by laying somewhat of a parallel case before the king, which was done so dexterously by the person he employed that the king took it for a real case, and gave judgment upon it, as he had done upon Nathan's parable, and, the judgment being in favor of the criminal, the manager might, by that, discover his sentiments so far as to venture upon the application of it, and to show that it was the case of his own family, which, it is probable, she was instructed not to proceed to if the king's judgment upon her case should be severe. 1. The person he employed is not named, but she is said to be a woman of Tekoa, one whom he knew to be fit for such an undertaking, and it was requisite that the scene should be laid at a distance, that David might not think it strange that he had not heard of the case before. It is said, she was a wise woman, one that had a quicker wit and a readier tongue than most of her neighbors. Verse 2. The truth of the story would be the less suspected when it came, as was supposed, from the person's own mouth. 2. The character she put on was that of a disconsolate widow. Verse 2. Joab knew such a one would have an easy access to the king, who was always ready to comfort the mourners, especially the mourning widows, having himself mentioned it among the titles of God's honor, that he is a judge of the widows. Psalm 68 verse 5. God's ear, no doubt, is more open to the cries of the afflicted, and his heart too, than that of the most merciful princes on earth can be. 3. It was a case of compassion which she had to represent to the king, and a case in which she could have no relief, but from the chancery and the royal breast, the law, and consequently the judgment of all the inferior courts, being against her. She tells the king that she had buried her husband. Verse 5, that she had 2 sons that were the support and comfort of her widowed state, that these 2, as young men are apt to do, fell out and fought, and one of them unhappily killed the other. Verse 6, that, for her part, she was desirous to protect the manslayer, for, as Rebekah argued concerning her 2 sons, why should she be deprived of them both in one day? Genesis 27 verse 45, but though she, who was nearest of kin to the slain, was willing to let fall the demands of an avenger of blood, yet the other relations insisted upon it that the surviving brother should be put to death according to law, not out of any affection either to justice, or to the memory of the slain brother, but that, by destroying the heir, which they had the impudence to own was the thing they aimed at, the inheritance might be theirs, and thus they would cut off, 1. For comfort, they shall quench my coal, deprive me of the only support of my old age, and put a period to all my joy in this world, which is reduced to this one coal. 2. Her husband's memory, his family will be quite extinct, and they will leave him neither name nor remainder. Verse 7. For, the king promised her his favor, and a protection for her son. Observe how she improved the king's compassionate concessions. 1. Upon the representation of her case he promised to consider of it, and to give orders about it. Verse 8. This was encouraging, that he did not dismiss her petition with currit lex, let the law take its course, blood calls for blood, and let it have what it calls for, but he will take time to inquire whether the allegations of her petition be true. 2. The woman was not content with this, but begged that he would immediately give judgment in her favor, and if the matter of fact were not as she represented it, and consequently a wrong judgment given upon it, let her bear the blame, and free the king and his throne from guilt. Verse 9. Yet her saying this would not acquit the king if he should pass sentence without taking due cognizance of the case. 3. Being thus pressed, he made a further promise that she should not be injured nor insulted by her adversaries, but he would protect her from all molestation. Verse 10. Magistrates ought to be the patrons of oppressed widows. 4. Yet this does not content her, unless she can get her son's pardon and protection for him too. Parents are not easy, unless their children be safe for both worlds. Let not the avenger of blood destroy my son. Verse 11, for I am undone if I lose him, as good take my life as his. Therefore let the king remember the Lord thy God, that is, 1. Let him confirm this merciful sentence with an oath, making mention of the Lord our God, by way of appeal to him, that the sentence may be indisputable and irreversible, and then I shall be easy. See Hebrews 6 verses 17 and 18. 2. Let him consider what good reason there is for this merciful sentence, and then he himself will be confirmed in it. Remember how gracious and merciful the Lord thy God is, how he bears long with sinners, and does not deal with them according to their deserts, but is ready to forgive. Remember how the Lord thy God spared Cain, who slew his brother, and protected him from the avengers of blood. Genesis 4 verse 15. Remember how the Lord thy God forgave thee the blood of Uriah, and let the king, that has found mercy, show mercy. Note, nothing is more proper, nor more powerful, to engage us to every duty, especially to all acts of mercy and kindness, than to remember the Lord our God. 5. This importunate widow, by pressing the matter thus closely, obtains at last a full pardon for her son, ratified with an oath as she desired, as the Lord liveth, there shall not one hair of thy son fall to the earth, that is, I will undertake he shall come to no damage upon this account. The Son of David has assured all that put themselves under his protection that, though they should be put to death for his sake, not a hair of their head shall perish. Luke 21 verses 16 to 18. Though they should lose for him, they shall not lose by him. Whether David did well this to undertake the protection of a murderer, whom the cities of refuge would not protect, I cannot say. But, as the matter of fact appeared to him, there was not only great reason for compassion to the mother, but room enough for a favorable judgment concerning the son. He had slain his brother, but he hated him not in time past. It was upon a sudden provocation, and, for aught that appeared, it might be done in his own defense. He pleaded not this himself, but the judge must be of counsel for the prisoner, and therefore, let mercy at this time rejoice against judgment. 5. The case being thus adjudged in favor of her son, it is now time to apply it to the king's son, Absalom. The mask here begins to be thrown off, and another scene opened. The king is surprised, but not at all displeased, to find his humble petitioner, of a sudden, become his reprover, his privy counsellor, an advocate for the prince his son, and the mouth of the people, undertaking to represent to him their sentiments. She begs his pardon and his patience for what she had further to say, verse 12, and has leave to say it, the king being very well pleased with her wit and humor. 1. She supposes Absalom's case to be, in effect, the same with that which she had put as her son's, and therefore, if the king would protect her son, though he had slain his brother, much more ought he to protect his own, and to fetch home his banished. Verse 13. Mutato nomine, de te fabula narrator change, but the name to you the tale belongs. She names not Absalom, nor needed she to name him. David longed so much after him, and had him so much in his thoughts, that he was soon aware whom she meant by his banished. And in those two words were two arguments which the king's tender spirit felt the force of. He is banished, and has for 3 years undergone the disgrace and terror, and all the inconveniences, of banishment. Sufficient to such a one is this punishment. But he is thy banished, thy own son, a piece of thyself, thy dear son, whom thou lovest. It is true, Absalom's case differed very much from that which she had put. Absalom did not slay his brother upon a hasty passion, but maliciously, and upon an old grudge, not in the field, where there were no witnesses, but at table before all his guests. Absalom was not an only son, as hers was. David had many more, and one lately born, more likely to be his successor than Absalom, for he was called Jedidiah, because God loved him. But David was himself too well affected to the cause to be critical in his remarks upon the disparity of the cases, and was more desirous than she could be to bring that favorable judgment to his own son which he had given concerning hers. 2. She reasons upon it with the king, to persuade him to recall Absalom out of banishment, give him his pardon, and take him into his favor again. 1. She pleads the interest which the people of Israel had in him. What is done against him is done against the people of God, who have their eye upon him as heir of the crown, at least have their eye upon the house of David in general, with which the covenant is made, and which therefore they cannot tamely see the diminution and decay of by the fall of so many of its branches in the flower of their age. Therefore the king speaks as one that is faulty, for he will provide that my husband's name and memory be not cut off, and yet takes no care though his own be in danger, which is of more value and importance than 10,000 of ours. 2. She pleads man's mortality, verse 14. We must needs die. Death is appointed for us, we cannot avoid the thing itself, nor defer it till another time. We are all under a fatal necessity of dying, and, when we are dead, we are past recall, as water spilt upon the ground, nay, even while we are alive, we are so, we have lost our immortality, past retrieve. Amnon must have died, some time, if Absalom had not killed him, and if Absalom be now put to death for killing him, that will not bring him to life again. This was poor reasoning, and would serve against the punishment of any murderer, but, it should seem, Amnon was a man little regarded by the people and his death little lamented, and it was generally thought hard that so dear a life as Absalom's should go for one so little valued as Amnon's. 3. She pleads God's mercy and his clemency towards poor guilty sinners. God does not take away the soul or life, but devises means that is banished, his children that have offended him, and are obnoxious to his justice, as Absalom is to thine, be not forever expelled from him. Verse 14. Here are two great instances of the mercy of God to sinners, properly urged as reasons for showing mercy. First, the patience he exercises towards them. His law is broken, yet he does not immediately take away the life of those that break it, does not strike sinners dead, as justly he might, in the act of sin, but bears with them and waits to be gracious. God's vengeance had suffered Absalom to live, why then should not David's justice suffer him? Secondly, the provision he has made for their restoration to his favor, that though by sin they have banished themselves from him, yet they might not be expelled, or cast off, forever. Atonement might be made for sinners by sacrifice. Lepers and others ceremonially unclean were banished, but provision was made for their cleansing, that, though for a time excluded, they might not be finally expelled. The state of sinners is a state of banishment from God. Poor banished sinners are likely to be forever expelled from God if some course be not taken to prevent it. It is against the mind of God that they should be so, for he is not willing that any should perish. Infinite wisdom has devised proper means to prevent it, so that it is the sinner's own fault if they be cast off. This instance of God's goodwill toward us all should incline us to be merciful and compassionate one towards another. Matthew 18 verses 32 and 33. 6. She concludes her address with high compliments to the king, and strong expressions of her assurance that he would do what was just and kind both in the one case and in the other, verses 15 to 17. For, as if the case had been real, still she pleads for herself and her son, yet meaning Absalom. 1. She would not have troubled the king thus, but that the people made her afraid. Understanding it of her own case, all her neighbors made her apprehensive of the ruin she and her son were upon the brink of from the avengers of blood, the terror of which made her thus bold in her application to the king himself. Understanding it of Absalom's case, she gives the king to understand, what he did not know before, that the nation was disgusted at his severity towards Absalom to such a degree that she was really afraid it would occasion a general mutiny or insurrection, for the preventing of which great mischief she ventured to speak to the king himself. The fright she was in must excuse her rudeness. 2. She applied to him with a great confidence in his wisdom and clemency. I said, I will speak to the king myself, and ask nobody to speak for me, for the king will hear reason, even from so mean a creature as I am, will hear the cries of the oppressed, and will not suffer the poorest of his subjects to be destroyed out of the inheritance of God, that is, driven out of the land of Israel, to seek for shelter among the uncircumcised, as Absalom is, whose case is so much the worse, that, being shut out of the inheritance of God, he wants God's law and ordinances, which might help to bring him to repentance, and is in danger of being infected with the idolatry of the heathen among whom he sojourns, and of bringing home the infection. To engage the king to grant her request, she expressed a confident hope that his answer would be comfortable, and such as angels bring, as Bishop Patrick explains it, who are messengers of divine mercy. What this woman says by way of compliment the prophet says by way of promise, Zechariah 12 verse 8, that, when the weak shall be as David, the house of David shall be as the angel of the Lord. And, in order to this, the Lord thy God will be with thee, to assist thee in this, and every judgment thou givest. Great expectations are great engagements, especially to persons of honor, to do their utmost not to disappoint those that depend upon them. 7. The hand of Joab is suspected by the king and acknowledged by the woman, to be in all this, verses 18 to 20. 1. The king soon suspected it. For he could not think that such a woman as this would appeal to him, in a matter of such moment, of her own accord, and he knew none so likely to set her on as Joab, who was a politic man and a friend of Absalom. 2. The woman very honestly owned it. Thy servant Joab bade me. If it be well done, let him have the thanks, if ill, let him bear the blame. Though she found it very agreeable to the king, yet she would not take the praise of it to herself, but speaks the truth as it was, and gives us an example to do likewise, and never to tell a lie for the concealing of a well-managed scheme. Dare to be true, nothing can need a lie. Absalom's recalled, 1029 BC. 21 And the king said unto Joab, Behold now, I have done this thing, go therefore, bring the young man Absalom again. 22 And Joab fell to the ground on his face, and bowed himself, and thanked the king, and Joab said, Today thy servant knoweth that I have found grace in thy sight, my lord, O king, in that the king hath fulfilled the request of his servant. 23 So Joab arose and went to Geshur, and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. 24 And the king said, Let him turn to his own house, and let him not see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house, and saw not the king's face. 25 But in all Israel there was none to be so much praised as Absalom for his beauty, from the sole of his foot even to the crown of his head there was no blemish in him. 26 And when he polled his head, for it was at every year's end that he polled it, because the hair was heavy on him, therefore he polled it, he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels after the king's weight. 27 And unto Absalom there were born 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar, she was a woman of a fair countenance. Observe here, orders given for the bringing back of Absalom. The errand on which the woman came to David was so agreeable, and her management of it so very ingenious and surprising, that he was brought into a peculiarly kind humor. Go, says he to Joab, bring the young man Absalom again, verse 21. He was himself inclined to favor him, yet, for the honor of his justice, he would not do it, but upon intercession made for him, which may illustrate the methods of divine grace. It is true God has thought of compassion towards poor sinners, not willing that any should perish, yet he is reconciled to them through a mediator, who intercedes with him on their behalf, and to whom he has given these orders, Go, bring them again. God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, and he came to this land of our banishment to bring us to God. Joab, having received these orders, 1. Returns thanks to the king for doing him the honor to employ him in an affair so universally grateful, verse 22. Joab took it as a kindness to himself, and, some think, as an indication that he would never call him to an account for the murder he had been guilty of. But, if he meant so, he was mistaken, as we shall find, 1 Kings 2 verses 5 and 6. 2. Delays not to execute David's orders, he brought Absalom to Jerusalem, verse 23. I see not how David can be justified in suspending the execution of the ancient law, Genesis 9 verse 6, Whoso sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, in which a righteous magistrate ought not to acknowledge even his brethren, or know his own children. God's laws were never designed to be like cobwebs, which catch the little flies, but suffer the great ones to break through. God justly made Absalom, whom his foolish pity spared, a scourge to him. But though he allowed him to return to his own house, he forbade him the court, and would not see him himself, verse 24. He put him under this interdict, 1. For his own honor, that he might not seem to countenance so great a criminal, nor to forgive him too easily. 2. For Absalom's greater humiliation. Perhaps he had heard something of his conduct when Joab went to fetch him, which gave him too much reason to think that he was not truly penitent. He therefore put him under this mark of his displeasure, that he might be awakened to a sight of his sin, and to sorrow for it, and might make his peace with God, upon the first notice of which, no doubt, David would be forward to receive him again into his favor. 2. Occasion taken hence to give an account of Absalom. Nothing is said of his wisdom and piety. Though he was the son of such a devout father, we read nothing of his devotion. Parents cannot give grace to their children, though they give them ever so good an education. All that is here said of him is, 1. That he was a very handsome man, there was not his equal in all Israel for beauty, verse 25, a poor commendation for a man that had nothing else in him valuable. Handsome are those that handsome do. Many a polluted deformed soul dwells in a fair and comely body, witness Absalom's, that was polluted with blood, and deformed with unnatural disaffection to his father and prince. In his body there was no blemish, but in his mind nothing but wounds and bruises. Perhaps his comeliness was one reason why his father was so fond of him, and protected him from justice. Those have reason to fear affliction in their children, who are better pleased with their beauty than with their virtue. 2. That he had a very fine head of hair. Whether it was the length or color or extraordinary softness of it, something there was which made it very valuable, and very much an ornament to him, verse 26. This notice is taken of his hair, not as the hair of a Nazarite, he was far from that strictness, but as the hair of a bow. He let it grow till it was a burden to him, and was heavy on him, nor would he cut it as long as ever he could bear it. As pride feels no cold, so it feels no heat, and that which feeds and gratifies it is not complained of, though very uneasy. When he did pull it at certain times, for ostentation he had it weighed, that it might be seen how much it excelled other men's, and it weighed 200 shekels, which some reckon to be 3 pounds and 2 ounces of our weight, and with the oil and powder, especially if powdered, as Josephus says the fashion then was, with gold dust. Bishop Patrick thinks it is not at all incredible that it should weigh so much. This fine hair proved his halter, chapter 18 verse 9. 3. That his family began to be built up. It is probable that it was a good while before he had a child, and then it was that, despairing of having one, he set up that pillar which is mentioned chapter 18 verse 18, to bear up his name, but afterwards he had 3 sons and 1 daughter, verse 27. Or perhaps these sons, while he was hatching his rebellion, were all cut off by the righteous hand of God, and thereupon he set up that monument. Absalom's return, 1029 BC. 28 So Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem, and saw not the king's face. 29 Therefore Absalom sent for Joab, to have sent him to the king, but he would not come to him. And when he sent again the second time, he would not come. 30 Therefore he said unto his servants, See, Joab's field is near mine, and he hath barley there, go and set it on fire. And Absalom's servants set the field on fire. 31 Then Joab arose, and came to Absalom unto his house, and said unto him, Wherefore have thy servants set my field on fire? 32 And Absalom answered Joab, Behold, I sent unto thee, saying, Come hither, that I may send thee to the king, to say, Wherefore am I come from Geshur? It had been good for me to have been there still. Now therefore let me see the king's face, and if there be any iniquity in me, let him kill me. 33 So Joab came to the king, and told him, and when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king, and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. 3 years Absalom had been in exile from his father-in-law, and now 2 years a prisoner at large in his own house, and, in both, better dealt with than he deserved. Yet his spirit was still unhumbled, his pride unmortified, and, instead of being thankful that his life is spared, he thinks himself sorely wronged that he is not restored to all his places at court. Had he truly repented of his sin, his distance from the gaieties of the court, and his solitude and retirement in his own house, especially being in Jerusalem the holy city, would have been very agreeable to him. If a murderer must live, yet let him be forever a recluse. But Absalom could not bear this just and gentle mortification. He longed to see the king's face, pretending it was because he loved him, but really because he wanted an opportunity to supplant him. He cannot do his father a mischief till he is reconciled to him. This therefore is the first branch of his plot. This snake cannot sting again till he be warmed in his father's bosom. He gained this point, not by pretended submissions and promises of reformation, but, would you think it? By insults and injuries. 1. By his insolent carriage towards Joab, he brought him to mediate for him. Once and again he sent to Joab to come and speak with him, for he durst not go to him, but Joab would not come, verse 29, probably because Absalom had not owned the kindness he had done him in bringing him to Jerusalem so gratefully as he thought he should have done. Proud men take every service done them for a debt. One would think that a person in Absalom's circumstances should have sent to Joab a kindly message, and offered him a large gratuity. Courtiers expect noble presents. But instead of this, he bids his servants set Joab's cornfields on fire, verse 30, as spiteful a thing as he could do. Samson could not think of a greater injury to do the Philistines than this. Strange that Absalom should think, by doing Joab a mischief, to prevail with him to do him a kindness, or to recommend himself to the favor of his prince or people by showing himself so very malicious and ill-natured, and such an enemy to the public good, for the fire might spread to the corn of others. Yet by this means he brings Joab to him, verse 31. Thus God, by afflictions, brings those to him that kept at a distance from him. Absalom was obliged by the law to make restitution, Exodus 22 verse 6, yet we do not find either that he offered it, or that Joab demanded it. Joab, it might be, thought he could not justify his refusal to go and speak with him, and therefore Absalom thought he could justify his taking this way to fetch him. And now Joab, perhaps frightened at the surprising boldness and fury of Absalom, and apprehensive that he had made an interest in the people strong enough to bear him out in doing the most daring things, else he would never have done this, not only puts up with this injury, but goes on his errand to the king. See what some men can do by threats, and carrying things with a high hand. 2. By his insolent message, for I can call it no better, to the king, he recovered his place at court, to see the king's face, that is, to become a privy councillor, Esther 1 verse 14. 1. His message was haughty and imperious, and very unbecoming either a son or a subject, verse 32. He undervalued the favor that had been shown him in recalling him from banishment, and restoring him to his own house, and that in Jerusalem. Wherefore have I come from Geshur? He denies his own crimes, though most notorious, and will not own that there was any iniquity in him, insinuating that therefore he had been wronged in the rebuke he had been under. He defies the king's justice. Let him kill me, if he can find in his heart, knowing he loved him too well to do it. 2. Yet with this message he carried his point, verse 33. David's strong affection for him construed all this to be the language of a great respect to his father, and an earnest desire of his favor, when alas, it was far otherwise. See how easily wise and good men may be imposed upon by their own children that design ill, especially when they are blindly fond of them. Absalom, by the posture of his body, testified his submission to his father. He bowed himself on his face to the ground, and David, with a kiss, sealed his pardon. Did the bowels of a father prevail to reconcile him to an impenitent son, and shall penitent sinners question the compassion of him who is the Father of mercy? If Ephraim bemoan himself, God soon bemoans him, with all the kind expressions of a fatherly tenderness. He is a dear son, a pleasant child, Jeremiah 31 verse 20.